very funny example that my teacher used to call this process the fattening of the pig. You feed it every day a little bit, and it just doesn't grow in one day or two. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Welcome to the Piano Sensei Way. I'm your host, Clinton Pratt, and I'm here to help you master the art of running a successful piano teaching studio. I'm excited to have Pablo Martinez here with us, and I'll tell everybody sort of how we got connected after he introduces himself. Pablo, tell us where you are and what you do.
Hi, Clinton. It's very good to be here with you. I'm based in Houston, Texas. I'm originally from Spain, but Texas has been my home for the past 9 years or so. And here's what I do most of my work.
Yeah, great. And we just met recently, if you want to call meeting, online, but I wanted to tell the audience. So I did a post in Piano Teacher Central, and it was about slow practice. I think I said slow, 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 so you can keep the flow, flow, flow. And it was because I was working with an adult student, and she was doing a Bach 3-part invention and just stopping and starting and struggling. And, I didn't want her to suffer any longer. So I interrupted and said, okay, why are you doing that? Like, you don't want to struggle. So just slow, slow, slow. Let's go slow so you can keep the flow. And, I insisted on her going really slow. And she did. And she did a huge portion of the piece. And it was great. And she looked at me afterwards like, wow, it actually sounded really good, And I said, yeah, of course, because it's still music. If it's slow, yes, it should be faster, but I mean, that's what music is a steady flow of sound. So, it's not music if you're just stuttering and stopping and starting. So anyway, I posted that, and then Pablo, what did you do? You reposted it or something?
Yeah, it was such a coincidence because I had been telling a handful of my students that same week about the same strategy because it's so important. And then I saw you posting that, and I woke up that morning and I saw it, and I was like, "What a great way to start the day!" I read that, and I said, "Well, I need my people on social media to know about this." So I did a snapshot of your publication, and I just made a reel, or no, it was a story, an Instagram story on that, and I just pretty much. It was me speaking about, like, saying out loud, like, I've been teaching this the whole week, and if you're my student, I've told you this several times, but it's just so important. So I'm just going to put it here because everybody needs to know. And that's pretty much how we connected.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So then we sort of sent some messages back and forth, and I was like, wow, yeah, why don't you come on the show and we can talk about practicing? Because as the audience knows, this is the Piano Sensei way, which is sort of arrogant, but it's in jest, like, you got to do it my way because I know best. That's the way. And and this is one of the ways is slow, 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 so you can keep the flow.
There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, Pablo, how did you learn how to practice?
Whew, I think it's gonna take me a while to explain. I think
Mm-hmm.
the reason why I learned how to practice better, uh, it was out of necessity, and I could go way back, but if I try to summarize it, I would say it came as a reaction to me being injured for quite a long time. While I was in grad school, I I had almost 2 years where I could not play the piano. I had a
Mm-hmm.
very bad tendonitis on my right arm, and we can trace it back even before, because I mean, I think the main problem I had is that well, I was in pre-college conservatory in Spain. I did my bachelor's degree also in Spain, and I was very fortunate to have very good teachers. But I always thought that progress at the piano was strictly linked to how many hours you practiced every day versus how good the actual practicing was.
Mm,
So I think while I was a teenager and in early my 20s, I I just evaluated how good my practicing was just based on how long I had been sitting on the bench, 5, 6 hours, and not really how smart the practicing was. And at the beginning, it seemed to be fine, and but I think I reached a point later in my at the end of my bachelor's degree where I realized that I was not getting enough done with the amount that I was practicing, which was substantial, by the way. But like, I was participating in international piano competitions, and you had to handle a lot of repertoire, hours of music, and sometimes I would sit for the entire day, and I wouldn't be able to practice more than just one piece that was 15 minutes. So I knew something was wrong, and that's when I started realizing that it was not just about the time, and I think what led to that injury is that we all know that when you practice repeatedly, good things just reinforced more, but also bad things can be reinforced. And I think I had several things in my piano technique that were kind of getting in the way. And out of that amount of hours and repetition, stress, and then entering into grad school and the load of the academics and then the recitals and playing and working, accompanying, it got to a point where you know I just had to stop, and I was injured for, as I said, like it was almost 2 years where I couldn't even like
mm,
have any type of performance activity going on. And that is when all started, because I realized that in order for me to learn anything, I needed to be so productive with the only time that I could practice without feeling pain or discomfort.
mm.
Sometimes it would be 15 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes a day. So, in that moment, I sat and I said, okay, well, you cannot practice 5 hours now. First of all, because you don't have the time, because you're not a kid anymore and you have to work, you have to do, your school and all that. But also, you cannot physically do that. So, what can I do to make this as productive as possible and get the most done with the least amount of time? And I think that's when I started like thinking about that, because the actual strategy of how to practice was never, I never assessed those types of problems. I just kind of did it naturally and thought it would just happen. So I want to say that is when I started becoming obsessed, if I may use that word, which is kind of like sometimes we think of obsession as something negative, but I'm trying to say that the word obsession can also be a good thing, and in this case, I want to believe it is. I got obsessed about that in my playing, and of course, translated to my teaching and my students. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm kind of obsessed with it too. So that's why I thought we should talk about it. Yeah. And I always stress to my students, why would you spend 3 hours on something if you could do it in one? I
Yeah.
mean, it's just common sense to me. Like, why don't you want to be efficient? Like, and my personality is that way. I'm just a very efficient person. And so, but like you, nobody really taught me how to practice
Mhm.
efficiently or even how to practice at all. I would just go to my lesson and then they would help me right then and then I would just practice. I don't know. It wasn't really until I guess grad school that my teacher was kind of practicing with me and I got better then. But yeah, so you had the physical injury and then yeah, because you couldn't practice long periods of time, you had to be as efficient as possible. So so you basically figured that out on your own. I mean, it wasn't like one of your teachers or something who.
I mean,
Yeah.
I had help, of course, but and that also happened at the same time as I was getting more involved into learning more about biomechanics and becoming very involved with the Taubman method in piano playing. So it wasn't just that. Like, I mean, I had to
Mm,
also, as I was doing that, I was trying to, learn how to move differently, do different things in a different way. But I think it all like lined up at the same time. My teacher back then was very strong on piano technique, biomechanics at the same time. So I think it was both a combination of being efficient and also being able to play risk free at the same time. And and that's when I started realizing that, even if I practiced 30 minutes a day, if those 30 minutes were laser beam focused, the retention was happening. Like the passages would still be there after a day or two, and and then I remember, I think it was Arthur Rubinstein that once said that he would never practice more than 2 hours or 3 hours a day. And when I might be wrong, I think it was him, but someone else could have said that. And
Mm.
when I was a teenager, I thought he's probably lying. He just doesn't want to say how much he practices. But now it's starting to make sense a little bit because all these masters of the piano probably figured that out. Maybe intuitively, but I'm sure that all of those knew how to practice way better than I used to when I was a kid.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, the technique, that's a whole nother topic. Maybe, you can come back another time. We can talk about um, the Taubman method or different technique.
Yeah, I would love
Um,
that.
yeah. So, what are your top three tips for effective practicing?
Okay. I'm going to say the three most recurrent things that I say during lessons. The one, the first one would be the one that the reason why you and I connected, like slow, slow to keep the flow. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
just mandatory, and it doesn't matter the level where you're at. It just needs to be there. I don't say that phrase exactly the same way, but you'll hear me if you're in my studio. You'll hear very recurrently the phrase: pick a tempo that allows you to do all that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that when I say that, I mean, you know, you maybe have an idea of how you want to shape this. You maybe have an idea of how you want to layer this in terms of voicing, or where's the direction of this phrase. And the reality is that when we play the piano, we are multitasking on like a 100x level. Like there's so many things happening at the same time, and I typically, when something doesn't work out, I typically attribute it to mental overload. That is like your brain is not able to process everything that's going on at the same time.
Right.
And just the only way, at least that I figured out to make that happen more smoothly, is just to spread it out so that you have time to process everything. I don't know if you've watched this video, but Tone Base has a video on YouTube about on with Marc Andrea Hamelin, and the main guy, like throws at him like passages, like impossible passages from like the most complicated pieces ever, and then he shows him Islamé by Balakirev, and then Amelin starts talking about how complicated it is, and the guy asks him, "So how do you tackle this type of difficulty?" And then the Marc Andre Hamelin says, "Slowly." I just have it ingrained, that scene. You should watch it. And then later in the video, they also show small snippets of like passages with the score scrolling at the top, and it's first he plays it fast, and then he shows how he practices, and you'd be amazed at the speed that he picks when he has to go through those passages, to the point that you probably would have a hard time trying to recognize that's actually Islamé. um so I like to, if a guy like him who has such an incredible command of the instrument is telling you that, I have a tendency to believe people that are so successful playing the piano like that, and in my opinion, he's right. You need to really do slow playing so that you're able to process everything that's going on. There's a lot of nuances happening at the same time, musically, biomechanically, orally also, because and this is something that it's not necessarily linked to only slow movements or slow music, but the piano is an instrument that naturally the sound decays immediately after you play it, and it doesn't have the sustaining ability as a singer, for example. So if you're able to play slowly, you probably are listening better, and you're like thinking about the every note until the very last consequence of it. So that would be my first one.
Yes, I find myself telling students this too when they are playing through and stopping and starting, that's a sign, like it's sort of like you said, your brain and your body are telling you, wait, I can't handle it, I can't process what's going on, right? And you're stuttering or
Hmm.
stumbling, right? And usually you can just fix that by going slower, like you said, because then you can have time to process everything that's going on. You can think, listen in the moment and think ahead of what's coming. So yeah, usually that's just very typical that if somebody is stumbling and stopping and starting, right, it's usually just because they're going too fast.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, I'd like to say, I like how you said, pick a tempo that allows you to do what you want, or play how you want. I also like to stress play at a speed so that it's easy,
Yes,
right? Like it
that
should be
is totally right.
easy,
Yes.
easy and fluid. Like just take your time, just easy.
Yes.
Because if it's easy enough, then yeah, then you're not overwhelmed with everything and oh, I hope I can keep up, and like you're chasing after a runaway train or something. Like it should just
Hmm.
be you can just keep the flow easily, and then that's when the music is going to happen, right? Because
Yes.
it's just easily flowing. You don't want to be struggling and panicking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I said, it's a question of being not overwhelmed mentally when you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know you're doing it right when it feels. Have you ever had that feeling of like when you're playing something and it feels like you're playing in slow motion because everything's like, so well, it's just happening. Trying to replicate that feeling as often as you can. I think that's what I find, in my kids playing and also for my own practicing to be the most important goal or one of the most important ones. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Before we go to number two, is there any negative or like disadvantage to going too slow? I don't know, or playing slow for too long, too much time. Like, oh yes, I practiced 3 months, really, really, really slow, and now I can't play it up to speed. Or can you talk about that?
Yes. The first thing, you'll bore your neighbors out of to death. That's the first thing. No, but just kidding. I think, yeah, I agree. And actually, I was gonna talk about another topic that I think goes very well linked to that, and is that you also want to think about larger shapes and like the general structure of everything. And I like to be like an architect when I play
Mm-hmm.
music or when I teach music. So I think at some point you have to go from the small and from the details to that to just performing. And I think the best way to achieve that is to, once you've done your work on like small things and like practicing slowly, you're just gonna have to run it through to see what it feels like on a performance mood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And One of my teachers used to mention this back and forth concept all the time. It's like, okay, we're gonna work on this now, play it, and and for the student, I think it might be frustrating because you've been discovered just one way of working on a passage and it's still not done because the student has to go back home and practice it, and then the teacher tells you to just run it through, and then you're like, well, it might not work because I
Mm-hmm.
just discovered this, I haven't worked on it. And it's like, yeah, yeah, but it's fine, it's totally fine. You try just to get the feeling of how this unfolds, musically or character
Mm-hmm.
wise. I know it's not going to be perfect, but you know at least you have an idea of what you go towards. And I just read this. I don't even remember where, but it said about how the work of a musician is to be being an artist in the execution, but a scientific in the revision. So it was all about
Hmm.
you have to work on your craft, detailed, like the slow practicing, the analyzing it, but then you have to just go for the big thing. And I think just allowing your student to run through things on a larger scale every now and then, it is what prevents you from being trapped in that slow practicing. At least
Right.
that's what I've seen in my experience.
Right. So then, do you just okay? Now I'm going to play it fast, or do you do it gradually, or do you do it? How do we get from slow to
Yeah.
up to
Well,
speed?
Of
Oh,
course, it would.
yeah.
In my, what I would do, if of course depends on the passage, on the type of music, but maybe you don't want to just scale directly to up to tempo immediately because you also don't want to be inefficient. Like, if you've been talking about the importance of the coordination and all that, and some of that needs gradual work and build it up, right? Some
Hmm.
people like to use a metronome click and just to add up a few clicks each time. Some people don't do it with a metronome, but at least it's the same type of intention of like gradually approaching to what you want it to sound like at the end. Uh, Perhaps if it's the craziest passage, I would probably refrain from just playing at full speed. I would just go in increments. But
Hmm.
again, what you said, that idea of making it sound easy, I think it's the most important thing. The moment you pick a tempo, if I guess to answer your question, if it feels easy to play, then it's the right tempo.
Yeah.
If it feels not easy, then you probably need to scale back a little bit,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Should we go on to number two?
Yeah. Well, number two, it's pretty much discuss what we said, the opportunity to go back and forth from small to big.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
that's something that I'm very, very very heavy on when I teach. I like to, at least the kid to have an opportunity to play the whole thing, uh, and then we work on details, and then maybe at the end of the lesson you want to run again because we've been working on a lot of details. And I sometimes I have the impression that if you dedicate your lesson to small details, their practicing also goes to that and not to playing through or larger form. So I think in a lesson you have to show both so that they practice both at home, right? The
Right.
same way if it was just playing and playing and we're not focusing on details, the kid would just play and play at home, right? Which I don't think would be appropriate either, but it's finding that sweet balance.
Right. And most people, especially children, just instinctively try to play from start to finish, right? Like they just
Yes.
start to play. And then if there's a problem, maybe they sort of fix it right there, right
Mhm.
then, but they don't really work it out. And then they go to the next part and then they might stop it, and they're just trying to get through the whole piece because they think, oh, the end goal is to play from the beginning to the end. So I'm going to try to play from the beginning to the end, right? And
Mhm.
they're trying to make it through that. Whereas we know that's really not efficient because you're just sort of going to keep reproducing that effect, right?
Yes. And that is so complicated, so tricky to deal with, especially with younger kids, because they have fun when they play. And then you have to tell them, well, we have to do something that's not what you enjoy doing in order to get better. So it's like you have to be very careful of how you approach the practicing of the details because most of them they really like playing through it. But then when you stop them, it's like, oh, we're just that particular note or that particular rhythm is not accurate. We're just gonna zoom in and see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge. You need to be very careful on how you approach that because uh, I guess the main challenge would be to make them feel that practicing and fixing problems is as fun as running through a whole piece, right? And that
Right.
takes a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So that one is small to big and going back and forth, right? So it's not just we do small sections and then put it together until we have the whole thing, but
Hmm.
that you're always doing it. Play the whole piece to get the overall sense, but then work on sections and then do that again and keep doing that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Do you want to connect with other teachers in person? Do you want to learn new teaching strategies and explore outside the box approaches? Join us at the Creative Teaching Conference, a radical retreat to recharge and reinvigorate your teaching. This unique conference was started by me and my two friends and colleagues, Christopher Oil and Tony Parlapiano, back in the summer of 2022. All three of us had so many ideas we wanted to share, but instead of trying to get selected for an MTNA or NCKP conference, we created our own event. We each present a few workshops, but we also have guest presenters as well. Topics include improvisation, composition, student-led learning. You'll experience inspiring workshops on creative teaching strategies and creative performance ideas. Learn about different ways to structure lessons, such as online groups, memberships, and subscription models. We eat meals together and plan social time so you can connect with teachers from all over the country, forming new musical friendships that will last a lifetime. Mark your calendars for July 7 to 9, 2024 in Cincinnati, Ohio. Check out creativeteachingconference.com for more info.
All right, what's number 3?
Number 3, this one I'm copying it from someone else.
Okay.
I don't know if you know him. His name is Graham Fitch. He's a pianist who wrote a book called Practicing the Piano.
Yeah.
That I purchased and read, and I found it was amazing, so interesting. I would recommend all your listeners to check it out. And he coined this strategy, the feedback loop. And this is something that I do again for myself and also for my students. It's when you try to practice a passage, you always divide it into 3 sections: the before, the playing, and the after playing, right? And that what he explains is that before you play, you decide first of all what chunk you're going to play or what chunk you're going to practice and what your goals are. So for instance, let's say I'm playing a sonata and I'm just going to play the first bars where the first theme comes in before the transition to the second, right? But that would be just picking what you are going to play. But what are you going to focus on? Well, I'm going to focus on voicing. I'm going to focus on tempo. I'm going to focus on character. I'm going to focus on just playing the notes at a certain speed because I'm at a very early stage of the learning process. But it's what he says is it's very important that you be very specific with the goal instead of just say, I'm going to try my best and see how good it gets, right? No, you actually focus on maybe 1 or 2 things instead of just play. Then the second stage would be, of course, the actual playing. You just play. And then maybe here's where you want to get more performance. You just play the passage, or, you just play slowly because you're learning it. You do the actual playing. Then the after, you assess. You according to what you did. Okay, did you accomplish the goal? You wanted to play with the right rhythm and at the right speed and all the notes together. Did you accomplish that? Yes or no? Or, do you want to bring out the melody a little bit more this time because you feel this passage deserves more lyricism? Did you accomplish that? Stop, don't play. Just close the lid of the piano. Just think of what happened, right? And then that's when you evaluate and say, well, it worked out, so I need to possibly pick a different goal because this one has become manageable. I've done it, I've succeeded. Or if it hasn't worked out, you have to go back to the first stage, and then you have to maybe decide what you're going to focus on, or maybe you have to change the goal because, imagine you play at a speed that did not allow you to do what you wanted to do. Then you have to go back to the pre-playing stage, and then your goal is going to have to change. Now, instead of 120 or whatever, I'm just going to try 105. And then you do the process again. But I think what helps me a lot about this method is how each phase is separate from each other. Like, you take your time to decide what you do, and it's as important as the actual playing. And then after you play, you stop and don't play because we know how difficult it is to mess up and not to just try it again, right?
Right.
You stop and think, okay, cold-blooded, why did I make the mistake? Was it a wrong fingering? Was it just speed related? Am I tight? Am I just moving the right way? So yeah, that's the feedback loop. It's amazing. You should try it. Well, I'm sure you've tried some variable of that because all of that is just new, different terminology, but I'm sure you've applied something like that already.
Right. Yes, it's very important. I try to do that with my students to have them, tell me, okay, we're going to do this part again. What are you trying to do? Right. And then we do it. And then right after they play, instead of jumping back in, I'll say, okay, so how was it? Right. And so we should be doing that with our students. And I don't know if you do that, with your students in your lessons. I do. I think it's important, instead of just telling them like, okay, when you practice, plan first and then do it and then, and, assess yourself. But we actually do it, okay,
Yeah.
let's do it now. What are you, right? And
Yes.
a funny little example, one of my students the other day, he was trying to make the climax of the piece really obvious and exciting, right? And so we were just working on this little part. He was trying it a couple times, and then he did it, and the climax was really good, but like he missed a few notes and missed a few rhythms. But right after he played it, I had a big smile on my face because he did the goal, which was to have an exciting climax. And I was like, "How was it?" He was like, "Oh, I messed up." And I was like, "No, actually, you did what you were trying to do.
Exactly.
I'm so happy for you. You were trying to make an exciting climax, and you did. I don't care if you missed a couple notes. Like we're trying to get that feeling. That's what your goal was." And he was like, "Oh," and I was like, "Yeah, do it again." And listen for that great climax that you just did. And he did, and that time the notes were and the rhythms were accurate too, right? And so yeah, and that happens all the time. It's like once they realize the whatever specific thing they're trying to work on, it's okay, at least in my opinion, it's okay if some of the other things aren't quite there
Yes.
yet.
Yes. And it's going back to that idea of how multi-layered playing the piano is. I think
Mm-hmm.
you have to be at peace with having to wait a little bit for all the things to get together and work in synergy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know how like, and I was thinking about this the other day. Uh, you know how typically it is well known, and like most of musicians say, like when you learn a new piece of music, you have to put the musical element right from the very beginning, because and I agree with that. Like you just playing the notes won't do it, because you start focusing on more mechanical things. But but I think everything needs to be at scale, like layered up. Like if you try to overwhelm you or your student with so many ideas from the very beginning, it's just gonna go back to that idea of mental overload. So I think rather than just trying to do everything, is like, okay, well, try to do everything, but we're gonna go sequentially. You do this, and then
Mm-hmm.
you do that, and little by little starts building up. I have this very funny example that my teacher used to call this process the fattening of the pig. You feed it every day a little bit, and it just doesn't grow in one day or two. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It would make a lot of fun every time he would say that.
That is funny. Actually, I love pigs, so I love that
There you go.
analogy. Yeah, I don't know why, but ever since I was a child, I love pigs. My first stuffed animal was a pig, and I collected all these pigs. I love
Oh,
pigs.
that's so cute.
Yeah, the fattening of the pig. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So those are the three things: pick a tempo that allows you to do what you want. Going back and forth between the small and the big, and then the feedback loop. And yeah, I'll link that book for the audience for everybody to
Yes.
check that out. So yeah, I wanted to ask you. Well, I sort of did, but didn't really let you answer. Do you help your students practice in the lesson, or just tell them how to do it and hope that they do?
Yes, I do, and I'm gonna tell you why. And you actually you mentioned how you do it too, and I think it's very important. You ask the student. You don't tell the student what happened. Like you ask. I think that's so important.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I tend to speak a lot, but when I'm in a lesson, I try to keep it to the minimum, and I try to make the student speak more, if possible, than me. So what I'll say is, I'll ask a question. Let's okay, we make a plan, you play, and then I'll ask him or her, how did it go? and they'll just verbalize it, which I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a deeper process than them listening from me what I have to say about how they messed up or not, right? So you ask and you wait. Did you accomplish the goal you wanted to accomplish? And sometimes they'll just freeze and won't say anything.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to hear my opinion on what you did, or were like, be honest with me? You didn't notice the difference? No, I haven't. Okay, that's fine. Well, I'm telling you, I was listening here, and I heard this happened. So I think we have to reevaluate the first goal because you wanted to play at a consistent rhythm, but those triplets are still not working out. So we have to go back and assess. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
do, and I do it first of all because I find that letting the student talk and verbalize it very stimulating for the whole process, and also logistically, like you have to set up, you know, you have to show them how it's done. I think for us who've been in the field for excuse me for decades already, like for us it comes more natural, but a person who's getting into the field of becoming expert at playing the piano, you have to show them the way a little bit. And I would not do the whole lesson on that, but I try to have some practicing in each lesson, and recurrently, because I think if I just do, imagine the kid shows up and it's like, well, we had family home this past weekend, so I didn't practice, so I haven't touched the piano in 3 days. And that's the day that you're like, okay, well, let's practice together, right? Of course, those days, that's what you do because, you have to be practical and it's good. But I would not just limit practicing to only those days. I would try to put a little bit of that into every single day. And I think that was one of my teachers in grad school later on when I was already an adult and I had some things already figured out. She actually sat at the piano with me and practiced with me,
Mm-hmm.
and that was revelatory because I typically would not do that with teachers in the past, and it just felt so humbling. Like, wow, here's my teacher sitting with me and trying to figure out my problems. So I think it was quite a boost for me to go back home and knowing that I had tried to figure out this with my teacher, not just by myself, and it was more encouraging. So yeah, to answer your question, absolutely, every day a little bit of the lesson is how to practice. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And I want to tell the audience we discussed this in, I think it was episode 6 with Michael Ritchie as well. Um, and yeah, he was talking about the main point of a piano lesson is to teach students how to practice. So,
Yes.
especially with children, like in my lessons, yeah, we're basically just practicing the whole time to get them into the habit of what to do, and then they just copy that at home, and then yeah, they become really good practicers. And sometimes
Hmm.
I remember with this one student I had a few years, he was working on something, it was a more advanced piece, and I said, just go ahead and work on that part, practice it right now, and I'm just gonna observe, and let's try to see how long we can go before I interrupt you. Okay. In other words, usually I have to interrupt and say, wait, don't do that yet. You're like, why didn't you go back? Or, like I'm
Hmm.
trying to guide them efficiently. And he went a really long time. I think it was 10 or 12 minutes. And I finally stopped him just because we were running out of time. But, I was so proud of him. Like, look, I didn't even have to interrupt. You were so good and efficient at your practicing that I didn't have to interrupt and remind you, wait, don't do that. You're not ready, or that should have been slower or faster. And yeah, so I think that's really important too, is just to help students practice so they know how to practice. And even, watching them practice in front of you is helpful.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Just listen and then just give him a correction or a suggestion along the way if they may, because eventually they'll get it right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say, I cannot be at your place every day to monitor how you practice. So you have to make sure that you become both the teacher and the student when you are by
Right.
yourself, because you know during our lesson you have me, but you only see me once a week, right? So
Right.
yeah, I totally agree. It is very, very important. Very, very
Exactly.
important.
Yeah, and sometimes this takes a little bit longer, but sometimes the long way around is better. Is if they played and then I say, "Okay, how was that?" and they don't know, maybe they just need to do it again, right? So, in I'll just say, "Okay, well, that's okay. Let's do it again and see if you can really pay attention while you're playing on. Then I'll ask you again afterwards, how was it?" And so it takes more time, but it's okay, right? In the long run, we're trying to establish that self-assessment instead of just the teacher jumping in and correcting, like asking the questions, having them evaluate and self-assess so then they can do that at home.
Yes, totally agree with that.
Yeah. That's good. Okay. Well, I guess we're about to wrap up. The time flew by. So maybe, you can come back again and we can discuss more of this or, technique or some other topic.
Absolutely, I would love that.
Yeah.
I was at such joy when I found you, because the idea of a podcast to discuss all of this, it's just so refreshing. At least in the piano world, like everybody's making content like this, and we should do it as well. So I think this is great. I've shared it with a couple of friends already, and I think the discussions are very, very refreshing, and keeps us in the search of piano mastery.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that. Is there anything else you want to say or tell people where they can find out more about you or anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I've made it one of my goals for the year to be a little bit more present on social media. I'm at TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. My handle is Pablo Martinez Piano. It's very easy for all of them. Pablo Martinez Piano all together. And one of my goals for this year is to create a little bit of that type of teaching content and like motivation practicing a little bit more regularly, because if I had that when I was a kid, I would have loved it. And I think there's a lot of potential for us creating stuff like this, and just to integrate it to the actual panorama where we're at in with all the social media and technology and all of that. So yeah, those are my handles. My website is also pablomartinezpiano.com. I post some of my performances there as well. And like I said, I'm here in Houston. I work as an organist at a church and music director, but I have my own private studio here in my place. And yeah, it was very, very refreshing to talk about all of this with you. And absolutely would love to come back to talk about either this or some other topics you want to discuss. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks so much, Pablo, for coming on the show. This is the Piano Sensei Way. You can go to pianosenseiway.com. Also, if you're just listening to this, we have video versions on YouTube, also the Piano Sensei Way, so you can see our lovely faces. And yeah, I will put all of Pablo's links for easy access. And hope everybody has a good day. Take care.
Bye-bye.